sea. It is a series of sea. It is not one civilization, but several civilizations which are one next to the other. It is a sea, the Mediterranean, in which we wish to develop a sense of being all in the same boat. A boat where we can heed the cries of the poorest of the world. Andrea Riccardi on Sunday at the inauguration ceremony recalled and reminded us of the heritage of Giorgio La Pira and how the Mediterranean dialogue of the 50s have left a mark. Starting from differences, this truly enhanced the drive for unity, ecumenism, peace, shared responsibility towards the poor, cooperation for true and widespread justice. I'd like to recall the initiative of the Sant'Egidio community aimed at establishing humanitarian corridors. These are, yes, a logistical solution, but they also are held up by solidarity so as to allow those seeking asylum, the most fragile people, not to fall prey of people traffickers. Thanks to these humanitarian corridors, more than 5,000 people were welcomed in Italy, France, and Belgium.
Certains de nos intervenants témoigneront certainement de l'initiative.
Some of the speakers this morning will undoubtedly speak a more recent initiative to establish dialogue amongst the bishops on the various shores of the Mediterranean, the closeness path, and the meeting with Pope Francis in Bari in 2020. They will speak of the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Universal Fraternity. We have to conceive shared initiatives which are alternative to the culture of clash, because our world is multicultural, as the Mediterranean Sea is going back to the very etymology of the word, a sea in the middle. Let us now leave the floor to our morning speakers. Let us hear the professor of theology, born in Algeria, Professor Mohamed Slimani, Professor of Islamic Studies. A consultant with the FIC Council with headquarters in Jeddah. The professor carries out research at the Al-Azhar University in Egypt, and of course he also is an expert in Islamic law. You have the floor. Thank you.
In the name of Allah, thank you. Thank you to our sister Valerie. She spoke in general about some of the main topics. And I will try not to go into details about what she already said. When I was asked to join this forum, I thought about the topic that was proposed, the Mediterranean as a multicultural sea. And when I read the list of the other outstanding speakers, and I am honored to be with them today, and when I read the topic of this forum, I thought, and then I realized what my message should be. And I tried to imagine myself sitting together with you here today, in front of all the participants in this forum. I thought of this image of all us together, and this is an unreal, a surreal picture.
تختزن عنوان الندوة اختزانا جامعا مانعا.
This picture embodies the topic and the theme of our forum today.
كل آمالنا كل
And it
آمال
enshrines all our hopes, all the hopes coming from the Mediterranean.
بزرقته الطاردة
The
للأعين
Mediterranean, which
الحاسدة
is a blue sea
وبشواطئه الماتعة
that attracts our
وأمواجه الهادرة.
eyes with its sands and its beaches, wonderful coasts,
كيف لا وهذه الأسماء المشاركة
its wonderful
في هذه
waves.
المنصة كلها
The speakers participating to
تعيش
this
حول
forum with
هذا
me
البحر
today
المتوسط
are all people living around,
تحمل
living
همومه وقضاياه
close to this sea, and they are fully aware of the anguish of the causes of the problem, but they also share the dreams of people living on the Mediterranean.
لأنها استمدت من هذا
They
البحر
understand their
توسطه.
suffering, and this is
فهي
a really
متوسطة في
beautiful
تفكيرها
image.
وتوجيهاتها وتوجهاتها بدون
These are
تطرف
moderate people.
يمينا أو يسارا.
They do not know hardline positions, not
فهي
left-wing nor hard-wing.
فهي تمثل نوعا من فسيفسائه
The
وتراثه
participants today represent
بأشكال شعوبه
the diversity
وألوانه الزاهية
of these
وأديانه العريقة
the
ومذاهبه
different colors of these areas,
وفنونه المبهرة.
but also the different religions,
إن هذه المنصة
different
بما فيها من
worships,
تنوع
different forms of arts.
هي مرآة صادقة نرى من
This forum
خلالها
is like a mirror
إمكانية الاستمرار
that helps us to see the
في
chance
مد
to go on
جسور
together,
التواصل
to build
بأدوات
bridges of
رزينة
dialogue,
للحوار الحضاري والثقافي والاجتماعي المتوازن
using tools to build a civil and cultural dialogue and a social dialogue,
الكثيرة التي
a
عادة
balanced
ما
dialogue
تعترض
in order
صناع
to
السلام.
overcome
وأبدأ وصف
all the
هذه الصورة
difficulties that
السوريالية
peace builders
إن شئتم
can face. I would like to start by talking
برئيسة الجلسة
of this image
الصديقة العزيزة فالي
and about my friend Valérie,
والتي أعتز
the moderator
بصداقتها
of this
سنين
forum.
عددا.
I'm really proud to be a friend of Valérie for many years.
ويأبى شكلها الظاهري إلا أن يكون معبراً أصدق التعبير
If you look at
عن
her,
بنت البحر الأبيض المتوسط
you can see that she is a daughter
في
of this
خلقها
sea.
وخلقها. وعرفتها في ميادين العمل الخيري
But I know also, I met her
في قلب
in her
مدينة
charity
باريس
work, in her social work,
وفي
in the center
خلوتها
of Paris.
المطل على بوبور في مكانها المطل على بوبور
in the area close to the
وبعزيمة
Boubou.
لا تفتر عن مساعدة المحتاجين من الفقراء
She
والمستضعفين.
was really enthusiastic. She wanted to help and to support those in need,
لفاليري.
poor people, weak people. So I would like to salute her work.
وأنتقل في وصف هذه الصورة التالية
Talking
لابن
about this
البحر
picture, I would
المتوسط
like
أيضاً
to talk about another son of the
ابن ألبانيا.
Mediterranean,
البلد الذي
a son
أعتز
coming from
بأنني
Albania,
قضيت فيه
a
وقتا لا
country
بأس
that I
به
had the honor to know because I lived there.
وأحيانا كانت برفقة أبونا الكاردينال ماتيو.
I sometimes was together with Cardinal Matteo.
تيقنت أن شعب ألبانيا شعب معطاء معتز بوطنه
And I saw
وتاريخه
firsthand that
المجيد
the Albanian people are very generous. They have a glorious story.
وأعتقد أن الأب الفاضل يوحنا يضيف إلى صورتنا هذه لمسة خاصة
The bishop gave a strong contribution to this image. It left a very special mark because
ليعلن أن
he has a very
ألبانيا هي
particular
بلد التنوع
close, just to say that Albania is another multicultural country, and it is a model of peaceful coexistence of Orthodox, Muslims, and Christians.
عائلة الأب يوحنا
And we know that Johan's family
عائلة تنتسب إلى طائفة معينة لها تاريخ طريف.
is a family with an important
فهو رجل أنموذج
background.
للتسامح والثراء.
He is a model of tolerance.
أما رابع مكونات هذه الصورة فهو الصديق الصدوق.
Another element of this picture is another loyal friend, Mr. Tarek Mitri,
الذي أعتبره عملة نادرة في شرقنا
for
المنكوب.
me is a precious, a rare element of our
ويعلمنا التاريخ
area, which is a very turbulent area. And history teaches us that people like him
كبيرا بسبب
have always
حمله
found
لواء الاعتدال والوسطية
obstacles because they work for peace
وإصرارهم على
and
تثبيت
they oppose
غاية
extremism.
التوازن والموضوعية في إدارة الشأن العام.
They always try to
وما
find
نشاطه
a balance
الفكري في
when
البحر الأبيض المتوسط
they work
وخارجه
in a public area.
بخاف
They are
عليكم
also,
جميعا.
he works also as an intellectual in the Mediterranean
الفكري
area.
والسياسي والأكاديمي أيضا.
Is very active in the political field, in the
ونضاله
academic
أيام كان
field,
مبعوثا
and we
أمميا
all know
ليبيا العزيزة
his fight when he
لا
was a
زال
special
كرام
envoy for the United
في
Nations
ليبيا
for Libya.
يذكرونه بكل تقدير
And many Libyans now remind
وهو
him,
حتى الآن
and they owe
يناضل
him a lot for
من
what
أجل
he
أن
did
يكون
for
هذا
them.
البحر المتوسط بحر عدل
He's still
وسلم
fighting for our sea, for the
آمن
Mediterranean,
لشعوبه بدون
in order for
تفرقة أو
it to be
تمييز
a sea of justice,
متسلحا بذخيرة الصبر
without
والجلد
discrimination
والإصرار
for its people.
وبدون
very
أن
patient.
يلتفت إلى سخط ساخط أو عتب عاتب فهو ابن البحر المتوسط.
And he never gives up. He is a real son, an actual son of the sea.
وأنظر في الصورة فأجد صديقي الذي أعرفه لأزيد من 30 سنة.
I look again at this image and I find another friend. I met him 30 years ago. Rabbi David Rosen.
والفضل يعود إلى جماعة سانتيجيديو في معرفته.
And I have to thank Sant'Egidio community.
جمعتنا منذ أن كنا كلانا شباب.
Sant'Egidio community helped us to meet when we were young.
منذ عرفته دائم العمل متفان
And when
في خدمة قضية.
since I met him, he has always been working with great dedication for the cause of peace in the United States, in Palestine, and in the whole
وهو
world.
عنصر أضاف إلى هذه الصورة ما كانت لتكتمل بدونه.
And there is another important element of this picture.
وهذه إرادة الله في خلقه أن يكون أتباع الأديان من
This represents the will of Allah in the creation.
لا في حرب وتسلط وصراع.
All those who believe in monotheistic religions have to live in peace, far from war, abuses, and conflict.
الجنوب والشرق. الصورة التالية لهذه
The other element of this picture comes from the south and the east.
الأستاذ أوليفييه روا الذي
Mr. Olivier Roy.
ما كان يغرد خارج سرب أقرانه من المهتمين
He raised his voice many times.
وثقافة المسلمين.
He deals with the Muslim culture and Islamic civilization. I think he is one of the few people who tried to give the correct interpretation of the Holy text.
في غوصه في مشكلات عويصة تتعلق بالثقافة الإسلامية.
He knows how to study in depth and how to research all the different aspects of the Islamic culture and how to analyze the impact of the problems in nowadays world. He made a study on the research. He made a study on what of the elements of the secular elements, the religious elements. And I think that Mr. Macron took inspiration from Olivier Roy's study. There's the need of the society to have religious leaders, to have strong religions. And I think that this is a turning point in his previous speech that had a much secular attitude.
وكذلك تتزين هذه المنصة أو هذه الصورة بالكاردينال ماتيو زوبي.
But this picture has to involve Cardinal Matteo Zuppi. I'm honored to know him. We first met in 1986 in Assisi, and since then, he has always had this friendship with me. I was honored to live close to him. I prayed at the dawn prayer when it was very cold in Rome, and then I went out for a walk after the prayer, and I met him very early in the morning, visiting the elderly in Trastevere, in the Trastevere neighborhood, in order to help them, because they were alone. They wanted to support them, to support those in need. And this is not an easy task, but it was easy for him. And I also know his political commitment. He is a dove of peace. I saw him working during the peace negotiations of our brothers in Mozambique. At that time, the Italian press called him a minister of God. He was very appreciated. And he's still appreciated today because he really worked to help people and he was always committed for the common good. Let me now conclude the description of this image, talking about Cardinal Jean-Marc Aveline, Archbishop of Marseille. I've just known that we come from the same country. We were born both in Algeria. He represents Algeria and France together. In the brightest picture possible. He comes from Marseille,
والتي تعانق
a city
سيدتنا
on the
إفريقية
Mediterranean,
في
a
عاصمة
city
الجزائر.
that embraces Algeria.
تعانق السيدة أمنا الإفريقية في حوار صامت
And it also embraces our motherland, Africa, in a silent dialogue,
وبالحرب والسلم أحيانا
full
وبالتعاون
of
والتآخي
a
أحيانا
complex story
وإن
of
أنسى
war and
فلن
peace,
أنسى لقاءات
collaboration,
متكررة
cooperation and
بسلفه
fraternity.
الراحل الكاردينال روجي
I cannot
التيغراي
forget the meetings
رجل
with
الدبلوماسية
his
والسلام
predecessor, Cardinal Echegaray, the man of diplomacy and the man of peace.
عندما كنت ألتقي به
And I had the honor to talk to him many times when we met and when we walked in Trastevere.
قصصه مع المسلمين الجزائريين التي حدثت
And he always told me his meeting with the Muslim people, with Algeria, and when he was Archbishop of Marseille.
ودا كبيرا
He really cherished and loved Muslim people. And that's why Pope John Paul II chose him as his special envoy in Iraq and other countries. And he told me personally that his experience in Marseille helped him to understand the Eastern world and his problems.
تشارك في إثراء هذه الصورة.
Jean-Marc and his work really enriched our picture. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm strongly convinced that this wonderful image of the forum of today can really help us to build an environment of peace that we desperately need in the Mediterranean. And I conclude here without reading the rest of my text, and I thank you for your attention. Peace be with you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, cher Mohamed, d'avoir fait ce panorama, d'avoir tracé ce
Thank you very much for having described such a personal view and perspective of the Mediterranean Sea. We have seen the suffering and the dreams of the Mediterranean. Let me now give the floor to Metropolite Ioan from the Orthodox Church of Albania. You were ordained monk in 1994, and now you are the Metropolitan of Corsa, and a position you took in 1998. As Ade Mohammed has recalled, Albania is at the very heart of the community of Sant'Egidio, and your presence here is a boundless joy. Thank you very much for being here. Let me add that you have been a member of the Orthodox Commission of the Ecumenical Church of Churches in Geneva. You have the floor.
Thank you. And I would like to thank the community of Sant'Egidio for its tremendous work done for promotion of peace, dialogue, and understanding between different people all over the world. We have to thank them always. The process of globalization presents various challenges for the whole human community. And from these challenges, our region cannot be excluded. In this global world, the influences of different groups from abroad become greater, whether positive ones that can help the dialogue and the strengthening of the values, or negative ones that can close communities within themselves, making the dialogue difficult and fragmenting society, and therefore weakening peace, coexistence, and mutual understanding. We are aware that cannot be peace and stability in one country if the neighboring countries do not have peace and stability. The whole region is affected by each other. We live in a multi-religious region, and although in different forms, all the countries of the region face the same and big challenges. After the fall of communism, in the institutional, economic, and political collapse, and in the great moral and spiritual vacuum that was caused by it, various political groups tried to exploit national and religious sentiments to realize their political goals, thus creating a great maelstrom of hatred, confusion, and suffering. Also, at times, they attempted to give to their wars a religious character, although they had nothing to do with the religion, wanting to exploit the powerful emotions that are triggered when one believes that his religion is in danger. Many people in the Balkans, ironically, have dubbed these wars the religious wars of the atheists. The same thing has happened also in some other countries of the large region of Mediterranean, the use of religion by distorting it to achieve political goals. Therefore, the role of religion after the failure of many ideologies has taken a priority, and our communities need to face these challenges and to find original and creative solutions as part of our global responsibility for the good of the whole region and more. Today's human society is at a crossroad and in a great spiritual confusion where manipulation could quickly take place. Major conflicts, both between individuals and larger groups, clashes between different people and states can pose a great danger to peace. All religious communities are called to be more vocal and to strengthen dialogue and cooperation, covering all the paths through which the extreme propaganda that incite hatred and division can pass. Religion should serve to promote and increase peace and harmony as an important part of its preaching. We must preach by words and deeds, without ceasing, how our religion sees the human person and what attitude they should have towards others. Also, this should not remain only a matter of narrow circles of theologians and dogmatic texts, but to be spread and be absorbed by all our believers. Inter-religious cooperation, dialogue, and understanding is necessary for our region to maintain peace, coexistence, and stability. Since the representative of other religious communities of our Mediterranean region had and will explain better than me their position about peace and how they see the human person, I will mainly talk about the position of the Orthodox Church. We live in the world where there is no peace, in a world of cruelty and turmoil, where injustice, poverty, conflicts, and wars are causing great suffering, destruction, and misery. Because there is no peace where there is evil, as Prophet Isaiah says. It is the duty of every Christian to strive for peace, because our personal peace is realized in the peace of all and takes on a communitarian dimension. Christ is our peace, writes St. Basil the Great. He who seeks peace seeks Christ. Without an attitude of peace towards all people, no one can be called a true servant of Christ. Starting from Christian anthropology, that God has made of one blood all the races of men, the Church sees human unity more deeply and the need for dialogue and love between people as indispensable. Although the Orthodox Church did not hold to any doctrine of holy or just war, she must be alert, and she must have a stronger and clearer voice against war, and especially against the use of religion in conflicts and wars. In the recent years, many voices have been raised against the use of religion in the ethnic conflicts. One of the strongest voices is that of Archbishop Anastasios of Albania, whose motto has been, "The oil of religion must never be used to flame the conflict, but to soothe hearts and heal wounds." Christianity always remained positive towards every person, always keeping in mind that every person is created in the image of God, and all human beings are associated to each other, because every person's divine origin is never lost, even if his or her religious conceptions and beliefs are mistaken. See the parable of the Samaritan. We must be aware that by respecting the dignity of every human person, we are not doing them a favor, because this dignity has been given to them by God, but we are helping more ourselves, because only in this way our human nature can be fulfilled. Without spiritual enlightenment, without religious values cultivated over centuries, without justice and forgiveness, without love and respect for every human being, whoever he is, it is difficult to achieve peace. Another danger for social peace, without which there can be no peace between peoples and states, is the great gap between the rich and the poor. The rich countries in our region should help the poor ones, because without narrowing the social gap, there will always be riots, and extremism and populism will flourish. In today's time, selfishness is a great enemy of peace. God has blessed us with a beautiful region. Therefore, all our efforts should be focused to stop our region from turning into a grave, but to turn it into a region where peace, understanding, and a coexistence prevail, because this is how we fulfill God's will. We must oppose every form of violence and persecution, and certainly against the instigators of war and hatred, because hatred does not come from God. St. John Chrysostom writes, God is not the God of war. To make war is to declare oneself against God, as well as against one neighbor. To be at peace with all men is what God, who saves them, requires from us. Blessed are those who work for peace, for they shall be called the sons of God. How are we to imitate the Son of God? But seeking peace and pursuing it. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Éminence, de nous avoir rappelé en effet combien bâtir la paix est un travail concret.
Thank you very much for having reminded us how practical job it is to build peace, a duty for every Christian, the duty to strive for peace. And thank you very much for having reminded us of this work for peace that we have to carry out every day. Now I'd like to give the floor to our friend Tarek Mitri, who is Dean of the Sant'Egidio University in Beirut in Lebanon. But in this particular country, he also had governmental positions. From 2012 to 2014, he was special representative and head of the UN support mission in Libya. He was director of the Issam Fairs Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. So you are now currently rector of St. George University in Beirut, but you are above all a great friend of Sant'Egidio because you always come to our meetings. Thank you very much.
Merci, cher ami, votre amitié m'honore.
Thank you, my dear friend. I'm honored by your friendship, but I will speak in English.
Once upon a time, there was an aspiration, to use the words of Robert Schuman, to see the Mediterranean become a lake of peace. Today, the Mediterranean is a lake of flames, blood, and tears. Rather than bringing people nearer to each other, it looks, in the eyes of many, as a sea of division. Many promising attempts of dialogue and cooperation across the Mediterranean are seemingly disappointed on both sides. We may have moved from partnerships that are motivated by the common good to interstate relations conditioned by security considerations. Security comes first. One of the earliest political expressions of the pursuit of peace around the Mediterranean was centered on seeking a just and durable peace in the Middle East. In 1980, 40-something years ago, the European Council adopted the Venice Declaration, recognizing the national rights of the Palestinian people and advocating an equitable regional settlement. 15 years later, the Barcelona process, together with its neighborhood policy, hoped to set up a Euro-Mediterranean zone of shared prosperity beyond free trade. There was a close-up of both real and imagined frontiers in the aftermath of September 11 in the year 2011. In the eyes of many, the Mediterranean separated countries and people rather than drawing them nearer to each other. Problems of immigration and terrorism, often amalgamated, drove the two shores further apart. Today, we find ourselves facing a double failure. On the one hand, Arab countries on the southern shore of the Mediterranean did not succeed their democratic transition, which was augured by the 2011 uprisings. On the other hand, European countries could not favorably influence that transition. On the contrary, they retreated into a defensive attitude against the spillover of violence and the influx of refugees. We may have departed from a culture of cooperation among neighbors, mutually profitable and based on shared values, towards more withdrawal, parochialism, insularities. Our countries have become increasingly like islands. Fears of terrorism and strategies of counter-terrorism compounded the refugee crisis. Of course, Europe is facing a record number of migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. It ignited stronger difficulties in the management of these flows. And there were cases of mass detention of new arrivals, lack of organization of resources in refugee camps, increasing human trafficking network, and most notably, a deficit in solidarity. And it is precisely where the meaning of what the work that Sant'Egidio is doing today in bringing Syrian refugees into better places. There is no universal model to emulate if we were to live together in peace across dividing lines. In themselves, political systems, no matter how democratic they can be, are no guarantees. Today, political cultures and strategies of mobilization put at risk our ability to draw on the riches of plurality. I believe there are a number of issues that determine the future of living together. Peace in the Middle East, to come back to it, or the lack thereof, cannot be left to the American deal of the century. Europe cannot renounce its role, no matter how difficult its role could be. Euro-Mediterranean relations are severely damaged if they are focused exaggerately on countering terrorism and protecting borders against more refugees. They need to retrieve a utopia, not in the sense of an impossible dream, but as a principle of hope, of reinventing neighborhood. Neighborhood has to be reinvented so that it is based on shared values and not on security considerations. Shared values are not always given. Their rediscovery and recognition is a process. It is creative and sometimes arduous. People of faith have an unparalleled role in this respect, in restoring the primacy of universal ethics over the assertion of identity. We live in a world where identity politics overshadows the riches of living together. And Pope Francis keeps reminding us of this imperative. He forcefully criticizes the tendency to create greater isolation in the name of sovereignty, with the risk of thwarting the courageous dreams of the founders of Europe. I would like to end with a metaphor. You know that Mr. Joseph Borrell used the metaphor of the garden, Europe, and the jungle that surrounds the garden. I was trying to think of another metaphor. I'm not here to talk about what Borrell had in mind, because he kind of corrected himself. He said, but the garden cannot be protected by erecting walls around it, but it can be protected by sending people to develop the jungle and transform it so that the contrast between the jungle and the garden, anyway, he tried his best. I would like to use the metaphor of the olive tree. The olive tree has often been associated with affinities and exchanges across the various shores of the Mediterranean. F.Braudel, whom you quoted, dear Valérie, said, whenever the olive surrenders, the Mediterranean ends. But what is the secret of the olive tree? It has a symbolic and, I dare say, spiritual significance. The olive metaphor is a spiritual metaphor. In scriptures, in Christian scriptures and Jewish scriptures, olive is coupled with light. In the words of the prophet Zechariah and in the book of Revelation, we read about olive trees and lampstands. 2 olive trees, 2 lampstands. In the Quran, the beautiful surah of light, Surah An-Nur, there is a reference to the olive tree, which is neither of the east nor of the west. Unlike the garden and the jungle, its oil almost aglow, though untouched by fire, says the Quran. May our olives, Madame la Présidente, here and there bloom with grace. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Tarek, de nous avoir rappelé aussi avec...
So thank you. Thank you very much, Tarek, for having reminded us with great realism
que vous portez pour partager
what the Mediterranean shores are like, and also for having reminded us the need to rediscover and share our values. It is a great joy for us to have here our friend David Rosen, who has been promoting dialogue amongst cultures for more than 40 years. He is International Director of Interfaith Affairs of the AJC. He is the chief rabbi of Ireland. He lives in Jerusalem. He has the voice of contemporary Judaism on the board of directors of the King Abdallah International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue. David Rosen, the word to you. Thank you.
Merci Valérie. Pace e benedizioni. It is a great pleasure for me to be back here with the community of Sant'Egidio and all friends. I am one of the dinosaurs of this history of meetings and peoples. Going back, I think, to 1988 or 88 or 89, and it's in a way both sad and yet exciting to recall that we have been talking about peace and about the place of peace and about the world in which we live for peace and of the goal of peace for now these decades, and our world does not seem to be a more peaceful world. That is sad. But it is exciting and inspiring to know that none of us are intimidated by that fact. That is a wonderful thing. It is, of course, the spirit that Bishop Ioan just expressed in quoting from Psalm 34. Seek peace and pursue it. Peace is something that we always have to pursue and that we must never give up on. And in fact, the message implicit in that is that as great a goal as peace is, there is value in the very process itself. There is value in the pursuit of peace, and we must never forget that. The challenges for coexistence in the Mediterranean today naturally vary according to context. In the northern Mediterranean, primarily immigrant Muslim communities have to contend with a new reality of living in a predominantly, overwhelmingly secular society, or one which is overwhelmingly culturally Christian, even if very often this means very little in sense of belief and practice. Whereas in the southern Mediterranean, the challenge of coexistence essentially confronts non-Muslims in Muslim lands. What they do have in common is the challenge, which of course is a challenge for societies throughout our planet, of overcoming exclusivist self-perceptions and bigotry towards those who are not members of one's own community. It seems to me that there are two main challenges here, the first of which is to live authentically in the spirit of the man whom Islam, Christianity, and Judaism see as their common ancestor, Abraham, or Ibrahim, alayhi salam. In our traditions, Abraham is presented as the embodiment of hospitality. In Genesis chapter 18, he is presented as sitting at the entrance to his tent, waiting for wayfarers. According to Jewish tradition, during the day, all 4 flaps of his tent would be raised so that he would not miss any traveler passing by to offer hospitality. In the biblical narrative, in that chapter in Genesis, chapter 18, he sees 3 men who appear to him as travelers. Later on, we discover they are angelic messengers. He hurries over to offer them refreshment. The first of these messengers announces the pending arrival of his son and heir in his old age. And then the other 2 go on to Sodom to save Lot and his family from the pending destruction that Sodom and its neighboring villages have brought upon themselves as a result of their evil actions and their wickedness. And there, chapter 19 begins, and the 2 angels came to Sodom. A great Hasidic master asked why they are referred to here when they go to Sodom as angels, but with Abraham, of all people, they are just referred to as 3 men. And he answers, because Abraham did not need to be told that they were angels, because Abraham saw the angel in every human being. This seems to me to be the biggest challenge for coexistence, especially in times of economic recession and political instability, namely, to be able to see every person in society as someone who is created in a divine image, and to respect each person's dignity and individuality, as again already mentioned by Bishop Johann. However, there is also the challenge of ensuring our respective theological traditions make space for the other. This is perhaps less of a challenge where religion is not in practice the dominant ethos, but where religion is indeed the major cultural factor in determining people's behavior. The importance of ensuring that the dignity of each individual is respected even when they are not part of the dominant ethos is key to ensuring positive and creative coexistence. This is the importance of interfaith initiatives. This is the importance of this meeting. This is the importance of Sant'Egidio's dedication to interfaith collaboration. It is about respect, it is about hospitality, it is about the dignity of the other. And there have been many wonderful initiatives, and our chair, Valérie, has referred to the document of human fraternity signed by Pope Francis and Imam al-Tayeb. In my opinion, even more important are the initiatives that in recent years have come out of the Muslim world itself. And I presume to take special note of the work of Sheikh Abdullah bin Bea and the Forum for the Promotion of Peace based in Abu Dhabi. 2 significant documents in particular have been issued by this forum. The one is the Marrakesh Declaration, issued in 2016 at the conclusion of a conference that was held in Marrakesh under the auspices of the King of Morocco, King Mohammed VI, and is based upon the Charter of Medina that Muslim tradition identifies as the agreement made by the Prophet Muhammad with the tribes in that city. And the second is bin Bea's new Alliance of Shared Virtues, promulgated at the end of 2019. These documents root themselves in Islamic tradition or memory, but highlight the most expansive and inclusive values, affirming respect and protection of full citizenship for non-Muslims in Muslim lands, and guaranteeing their human rights accordingly. These documents and this approach reflects a very important concept for religions, and I think critical for coexistence, and especially in the Middle East. But universally, that I will describe as theological humility, humilità teologica, recognizing the divine presence in other religions and ways of spiritual life. From a theological point of view, this seems to me to be critical in facilitating the goal of true respect, dignity, and peace that we seek. Enlightenment and education are, of course, critical importance, but at the bottom line, positive and creative multiculturalism requires the essential, respectful human encounter that Abraham's hospitality personified, and that we have heard from our Dr. Muhammad here that the journey that we have been together with Sant'Egidio has helped deepen within us, and as a result, we are able to bring to others around the world. I would like to conclude with two verses. The first is from the Hebrew Bible, from the prophet Malachi, who envisions a harmonious time when, quote, "They who revered the Lord spoke with one another, and the Lord heard and listened, and a book of remembrance was written before him of those who revere the Lord and consider his name." That is Malachi chapter 3, verse 16. The other quote is taken from the Quran, perhaps the most famous quote, Islamic quote for interfaith relations, which is from Surat al-Hujarat, as you know, 49, verse 13. "O humankind, we have created you from a single man and woman and made you into tribes and nations in order that you may know one another." We may ask regarding the first verse from Malachi, what is so noteworthy about people speaking to one another that God considers this something that has to be inscribed in a book of those who revere him? And we may ask regarding the statement in the Quran, what is such a big deal about knowing one another, that this is the purpose of our creation? The answer, of course, is that if we do not know one another, we fall victims to all kinds of negative prejudice and even hostility. To live in peace and harmony with one another requires us to know one another. We cannot respect what we are ignorant of. To live in peace and harmony requires us to know one another. Similarly, when we do not talk to one another, we are vulnerable to all kinds of misunderstandings and misperceptions. That is why dialogue is so important. And that is why the spirit of Assisi is so important. And that is why this mission of Sant'Egidio is so important. True dialogue means talking with one another, not at one another. It enables us to know and understand one another. The Mediterranean poses a unique challenge and opportunity for us to be able to live and embody these values and ideals of our religions, which are so uniquely connected to this part of the world. We must seek peace and pursue it. We must understand that the pursuit of peace in itself is a sacred value. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, cher David, de nous avoir rappelé combien les religions sont un facteur clé pour garantir.
Thank you. Religions are a key factor in order to grant peaceful coexistence through hospitality. Thank you for your words. I would like now to introduce you Olivier Roy. Olivier Roy is a politologist, orientalist, professor at and president of the Center of International Studies Robert Schuman, research director at the French Centre National de Recherche Scientifique, and professor at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Science, and a professor at the Institut d'études politiques of Paris. But you are, first of all, a man deeply grounded to our missions, and you led the OSCE mission, and you've also worked at the Office of the UN Coordinator for Afghanistan.
Cher Olivier, nous vous écoutons.
Dear Olivier, the floor is yours.
Je vous remercie. Je voudrais commencer par juste un petit.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to start by making a very short comment on a wonderful and warm introduction by by Professor Slimani for all of us. And I totally share what President Macron said here in Rome. But when he is in France, I have some doubts about what he says.
Pour la Méditerranée,
as far as the Mediterranean is concerned, the Mediterranean Sea is not just a place where people move, but it is also a place for the flow and movement of ideas. Religious ideas, mainly. Religious leaders, people of worship talk about civil society, organize and held meetings like the meeting of today. There are networks of people talking and meeting each other. And we see that there is a real effort to build a community, not just creating networks in order to talk, but we want to build communities. And these are bottom-up initiatives, but the Mediterranean Sea is not just a society. It is made up of states, and states have their own policies, and they have also religion policy that directly or indirectly affects their life. As Tarek Mitri has already highlighted, what is nowadays the obsession of state? It is security, the fight against terrorism. So we see that there are more and more policies of de-radicalization, of religious de-radicalization, because they have the aim of building, or better promoting, a more moderate position in religion, for example. What's the problem of all that? First of all, we have to understand what modern religion is, and this is a question to you. States' policies is based on the fact that extremism and radicalization is a consequence of religious radicalism, in particular for problems linked to the jihad. But we are not talking about this today. We just want to say that this is the premise of the policies of de-radicalization that are implemented in the north and south of the Mediterranean Sea. So we need to understand what states want, what their policies are. So we try to find two different kinds of responses in the north or the south of the Mediterranean. It is clear that the context is quite different, the background is quite different, because in the north we have countries with a Christian tradition or with a secular tradition, but they are both interlinked. In the south of the Mediterranean we have states or societies that are mainly Muslim. In Northern Europe, promoting a moderate religion means promoting secularization. For example, there is enlightened Islam. We try to push in France mainly towards a new secularization of religion. What does it mean? It means that state policies in the northern part of the Mediterranean are based on the idea, not clearly expressed, that a moderate worshipper is quite important, because there's a problem. We want to change completely the religious element in a framework of what in France we call Republican values, but we have never given a definition to this Republican values. But the states want a secularization of religion. On the contrary, in the south of the Mediterranean, the fight against radicalization is waged in name of the return of a traditional Islam, which is culturally rooted, a more conservative Islam. So as you can see, there are two opposing positions in the north and the south of the Mediterranean, which are fed by the states. And this is a problem, because if states go towards two different and opposing directions in order to try to moderate the religious element, they stress the differences between the North and the South. So there is a real contradiction between public policies and the efforts made by grassroots communities, but also religious leaders and people who want to try a common ground for their religions, not on the theological level. So this is the first problem created by the decisions made by the states in order to counter radicalism. We have to understand what a moderate religion is. But now I would like to deal with the second problem, the fact that the religious element is owned by the state. States have a national clergy. The states appoint religious national dignitaries who depend on the governments. For example, imams are controlled by the state. So the state controls religion. In the northern part of the Mediterranean, there is an indirect control of religion by the state because European states' constitution forbid the direct intervention of the state in religion and in the building or in the construction of religious institutions. So there are two different approaches, but each state wants to promote its own religion, its own Islam, if we talk about Islam. Also in France, where there is a clear division between state and religion, clearer than in other states of Europe, we see that the government, the state, has been trying for 30 years to build an organization of French Muslims. We tried maybe 4 or 5 times, but all these efforts failed, and they will always fail. But this is what politics does. Regardless the left wing, irrespective of being left wing or right wing parties, both in the northern part of the Mediterranean or in the southern part, in both cases, we have 2 different policies. One, supporting the definition of good religion, and the other, helping or better imposing the organization of this good religion. And all this to the detriment of the freedom of religion, because religious freedom does not consist on being able to have the freedom of practicing your own religion, but also having the possibility to build a more democratic society. There is no religious freedom without political freedom. Otherwise, we would have the state controlling religious groups, controlled and governed by the state. So this is not the place where we can oppose public policies, because there are many organizations trying to make efforts in the civil society, exactly like us. We are here because we have to work and to cooperate with states, but at the same time, governments has to take into consideration different movements of the civil society. We must not forget that there is tension between these 2 opposing poles. States, regardless of their political affiliation, on the one hand, and the civil society on the other hand, who wants to try its own responses to religious problems. They must not be opposed. I just want to say that we must be aware of these existing tensions. And the response does not belong to states that have defensive positions. It is up to the civil society to bring goodwill, to bring new perspectives, and to bring new ideals. Thank you.
Merci Olivier Roy d'avoir
Thank you, Olivier Roy, for telling us about the complexity between religion and state, both in the northern part of the Mediterranean and in the southern part. And thank you also for raising some questions about this topic. And now I would like to give the floor to Cardinal Matteo Zuppi. Dear Matteo Zuppi, Archbishop of Bologna since 2015 and President of the Italian Bishops' Conference since last May. He was a parish priest in Rome, first in Trastevere and then in the eastern suburb of the city. In 2012, he became Auxiliary Bishop of Rome, and since 2000, he has been ecclesiastical assistant of the community of Sant'Egidio. In 2019, he was created Cardinal by Pope Francis, with the title of the Church of Sant'Egidio. His name is linked to the commitment of the community of Sant'Egidio to peace, especially in Africa, and we remind of peace in Mozambique and also in Latin America. Matteo Zuppi is also author of studies and spiritual reflections of the challenges of our time.
Grazie.
Dear Don Matteo, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Valérie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Somehow, the Mediterranean has always represented globalization because everybody always looks for shores, and it was always something that represented openness and a blend of cultures. The other day I was in Palermo, and there is a surah of the Quran written on the column at the very entry of the cathedral, because this cathedral was before a mosque. So what is the challenge? The challenge is having the rare humanity that St. Paul encountered in Malta when he was shipwrecked there. During the shipwreck, which represents the crisis, we all need this rare kind of humanity. Nobody has exclusive right over it, and the challenge we have is to turn the Mediterranean into the first lab of what Pope Francis described in All Brothers, his encyclical, and which calls for everyone's effort. So, is it a question of clashing or encountering? The Mare Nostrum, our sea, as the Latins put it, is beautiful because it represents us, an us. Otherwise, we only have the ego, which is extended to the city of man, i.e. this represents many islands and isolated cities. Possibly here rights are guaranteed, but if we don't have the rights of the us, meaning the community, even the individual, the ego is not guaranteed. Clashes means closing up. It actually fosters fear. And if the clash is imagined as a clash of cultures, even more so, one feels a right to defend oneself. And meeting the encounter looks like weakness. And worse even, we can even think that encountering is bad. It is sized down. But there is no future without hospitality, welcoming the other. And this welcome has to do with coexistence. Those who welcome others is capable of living together with others. Those who cannot offer hospitality end up alone. And we know that there are many temptations towards thinking of security or safety as something that calls for excluding the other, because you're never safe. However, you're never safe if you exclude others. Walls don't guarantee security and safety. Indeed, they make it worse. Coexistence is productive. The Mediterranean has always been a place of coexistence and necessarily a place of mediation. And there is a cry rising from the Mediterranean. Let us not forget it. A cry that is a wound, which is the cry for save me. And peace starts when we save both lives and hope. If hope dies, the person dies. So, All wars have to do with this. Let me say something about universality. I was struck by an expression by President Macron the other day, because he said, universalism is the true antidote against relativism, against the fragmentation of the world. And wars, he added, arise because you humiliate the other. The humiliation of the weakest, of those who has not been able to come to terms with their history because we have not made him able to do so. This humiliation justifies war. Now, we need to say that we do humiliate. Oftentimes, we don't pay enough attention towards the other, and we leave resentment behind us. And this justifies war. This is why the Mediterranean must become a sort of laboratory of encounter, and the opposite of humiliating is giving worth and value. So we have to experiment human hospitality, offer our welcome, and we have to multiply opportunities for encounter, meeting, and cooperation between the two shores of the Mediterranean, above all, and with the countries bordering the Mediterranean, whose destiny is shared. So leaving room for poverty, desperation, is detrimental for all and can become the reason for conflicts and clashes in the future. We must all get down and understand what Mare Nostrum, our sea, means, and who is the us, the community that we have to rebuild, and the relationships we can weave in this great network. Dialogue is not a chemical reaction. It is an algorithm which artificial intelligence has not managed to come up with. And the role of religions is crucial, because God and the art of God is dialogue, to think of a unity. And practice in Christians has to do with Trinity, and God teaches us how to practice this through dialogue. Peace needs dialogue to build bridges and to continue bringing down walls. Sometimes it is difficult to have a dialogue. For some, it is naive or even dangerous. But it is strange for me not to establish dialogues, and we have to commit ourselves. Otherwise, as Professor Rosen was saying, we give room to biases, prejudices, and you cannot respect what you don't know. This is why we need to have a dialogue. So the Mediterranean must be a connection, a point of connection, and not a wall. Because only if we overcome fears can we find our future. So let us come now to migrations. This is a very Mediterranean issue. It has to do with the whole of Europe, but it must not only dealt with in terms of security, but above all, it must have to do with humanism. After many years, we still have to free ourselves from the temptation of reacting merely with fear. Let us leave that in the past. And this is a shared responsibility in Europe, whose roots are in the Mediterranean, so that we can have a different approach, not based on fear, but which should be based on a future-looking vision. This is why we have to turn the Mediterranean into the laboratory of the encounter. For many, the dialogue with Islam represents giving in to weakness, and positions tend to become radicalized. So after the 11th of September attack, people felt even more justified in defending themselves with the basis of a culture clash. And this was given in Europe as the key for interpreting anything happening, even on the shores of the Mediterranean. And the war in Iraq was presented as a war of civilization, according to a vision based on clashes or the inevitability of a clash. This is why we must turn the Mediterranean into the place, the laboratory for encounter, for meeting, for culture, to show that civilizations, as is the case in the Mediterranean, nurture each other and have always done so. Today, we can and we have therefore the duty and responsibility to do so. So, history is behind us. We shouldn't defend the past, but we should base ourselves on the past to invest in the future, not to accept inequalities between the northern and the southern shores of the Mediterranean. Otherwise, we give rise to resentment. And we have to think of ourselves together and find answers. And this is what is meant by our sea, mare nostrum. Otherwise, it turns into a monster sea. This is a play on words between monstrum and nostrum. Let me finish with a great Mediterranean man. We recalled him in the past, but I believe that as a son of the Mediterranean, he gave the best interpretation, the patriarch Athenagoras, who said, "In Monastir, I met the Slavs and I knew him. I observed the Austrians and Germans. I lived with the French for 2 years. All peoples are good. Each deserves respect and admiration. I saw men suffer. All need love. If they're bad, maybe it is because they haven't met real love. The love that irradiates love and life. I know that there are evil forces that sometimes take over men and peoples, but in love we must find the courage of loving men and women and to discover that in order to exist we need for all mankind and all peoples exist. And this is the true root, the truest reality for the Mediterranean in the past, and I truly hope in the future too."
Grazie. Grazie, Don Matteo.
Thank you, Cardinal Matteo.
Bien encadrer l'espace et le temps de la Méditerranée.
Thank you for
Vous dites que la Méditerranée est un laboratoire.
recalling the space of the Mediterranean. You reminded us that the Mediterranean is a place of encounter of culture, is a laboratory. If hope dies, also the person, individuals die. So it is urgent to invest in the future. Now I'm happy to give the floor to Cardinal Jean-Marc Aveline, Archbishop of Marseille. We can say that you are a son of the Mediterranean because you were born in Sidi Bel Abbes in Algeria, as Mohammed Slimani reminded us. You taught theology and science of religions at a number of French theological faculties, and you became the Vicar General of Marseille in 2007. From 2008 to 2012, you were consultor at the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. And in 2019, you were appointed Bishop of Marseille and created Cardinal by Pope Francis in August 2022. Congratulations. You're a member of the Vatican Dicasteries for Bishops and Interreligious Dialogue. We will listen to you with joy and attention. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Valérie. En premier lieu, je voudrais...
Thank you, Valerie. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this meeting for inviting me. And first of all, I would like to thank Andrea Riccardi. I had the privilege to share a dinner yesterday night. And thank you also to Valerie for the many encounters, meetings we shared together. Also in France, Valerie always tries to put the community of Sant'Egidio at the service of all the challenges that we have to face in our territory and where we have already recalled. Then I would like to pay a tribute to Cardinal Echegaray. Professor Slimani reminded him because he created me Cardinal, and he helped me to discover the community of Sant'Egidio, because I remember that when I visited him in Piazza San Callisto in Rome, he helped me to discover Trastevere neighborhood, and I discovered the Church of St. Mary in Trastevere and the community of Sant'Egidio. So I would like to pay a tribute to him. And
nous avons, avec les Marseillais, nous avons fêté le cardinalat, rendu grâce à Dieu.
Together with the cardinal, we have also celebrated, we in the city of Marseille, my ordination as a cardinal on Sunday, the 25th of September. And that day, that is the day of the birthday of Cardinal Echegaray. He would have now 100 years. He would be now 100 years old.
Je voudrais dire deux choses. La première
I would like to make a couple of comments. First of all, I would talk about my own experience in Marseille, and in the second part of my speech, I would like to tell you about what I see as the challenges of the Mediterranean from my point of view in Marseille. Marseille is a multicultural city. Maybe this is one of the last big cities in the Mediterranean. Cardinal Echegaray always was used to say that in Marseille you can make the tour of the world in just 80 hours. And this is true. And I want to stress now the importance of the Armenian community. There are 80,000 people of the Armenian community in Marseille. And it is the right to think of what we could do for peace in Armenia. But Marseille is also a message. Tarek Mitri maybe would remind what happened after the visit of Pope John Paul II in Lebanon, when he said that Lebanon is more than a country. Lebanon is a message. When President Macron visited Marseille, I, together with Professor Roy, like listening to him when he is abroad, sometimes also when he is in France, but you have to interpret his words. And when he was in Marseille, you have the mixed position, because Marseille is halfway. It is half in France and half abroad.
Un ami algérien m'a confié qu'un jour, arrivant à Marseille,
I have an Algerian friend, and he told me that one day when he was coming to Marseille, he had wrote a postcard to his family in Algeria, said, "Okay, I've just arrived in Marseille, everything is okay, now I go to France."
Alors Marseille est, quand le président Macron est venu,
So, this is Marseille. When President Macron visited our city, I wrote a report to say that Marseille is not like Lebanon, but it's more than a city. Marseille has a message to deliver. Marseille is now sad, but has now also a message of hope. Sadness because there's poverty. Poverty is evident and present in the city, and the consequences of poverty increase addictions, creates mafias and crimes that are real plagues of our society. And the victims are the young people of our cities. They are the victims. Today in Marseille, many young people die because they are victims of narco-traffickers. These people don't care about young people. On that day, I wrote that Marseille is wounded, and under its eyes there are mafia killing people and transforming young people of the poor neighborhoods. They turn them into victims of drug trafficking, prostitution, and other crimes. Many people are now trapped in these dangerous neighborhoods of Marseille. I grew up in difficult neighborhoods of Marseille. in one of those neighborhoods. We were migrants, me and my family and me. We were poor. So I grew up in one of these difficult neighborhoods in north of Marseille. But now the inhabitants of these suburbs that I visit constantly, they are prisoners. There are checkpoints in these suburbs because traffickers have taken these suburbs that are now ghettos, that are now difficult and dangerous places. And in other neighborhoods, there is indifference, and indifference has suffocated anger. And this is one of the main problems that we have. And this applies everywhere in the Mediterranean. Where indifference suffocates anger, there are no hopes.
Ne comprendront-ils pas la
And so, unless
avec les réseaux de la mort,
drug users understand what they do with the network of death and how dangerous is their behavior, so we wonder why. Why is the European Union financing the mafia from Libya that keep open the concentration camp for migrants in Libya? Conscience must not be deaf. We need the Mediterranean to wake up. This is what we want. So, Marseille has this message of sadness, of desperation, but Marseille also has a message of hope. Why? Because its people is able to live plurality, multiculturalism as a blessing, not as a threat. But we need to be able to resist. We need to resist all the political voices that try to make us believe that migration is just a threat. This is not true. It's also a resource, it's also an asset. So if we let this message to take upon us, we will not have hope. People fully understand the situation before politicians and policies. Marseille also has a message of hope, thanks to the dialogue between identity and my identity and the identity of the other. In Marseille, there is a close link of the different identities. Why? Because you can say, I am from Marseille, but my grandfather was from Algeria, my grandmother was from Armenia, my father was Italian, and this is one of the main features of our Mediterranean culture. I am Christian, and for me, this belongs to my Christian faith. And I say this by reminding what David Rosen was saying and what would also... We cannot think of our own identity without referring to the identity of the people around us, and also to the Jewish identity, which is part of our own identity. So we have to understand that we cannot be Christian without thinking of the others. This is the only way to open up to the rest of the world. And this is what the Vatican Council had to do, think into our roots, to our Jewish roots, in order to open up to the other religions. So, in Marseille, we have this message of hope. And I can see it in the streets. I see small different realities, as Professor Roy was saying. I see what civil society is doing, what people do before the state. Each year, for example, we organize a day for Islamic and Christian families, and each year we have about 300 people. We organize a meeting between imam and priests. They meet monthly in order to talk about the problems of the city. These are small initiatives, but I can say that these initiatives work. I also see the initiatives of the sports centers, the different neighborhoods, and the families. There is a vibrant community life. They work resolutely, and little by little we create links, relationship of different people from different faiths that care for the poor, that fight also within their own religion against hate speech or exclusion speeches. Believing today means resisting. A kind of resistance that we have to use also within our own religion, fighting against those who want to make us believe that differences and divisions are good. This is not true. Those who fight, and we have to pay a tribute to them, whether they are Jewish, Christians, Muslims, or atheists, they all have to fight against dominant speeches also in their own religion. And I, as a Christian, am fully aware of that. But hope always wins when it is carried out by people of goodwill, women and men, regardless of their religion, regardless of their personal belief. Hope always wins when it does not just hit to history, but it listens to the stories of those who are defeated, those who have suffered because of the turmoil of history, those who have been won by history, as a great Jewish thinker said. But when we listen to them, we open up to a different story, which is different from the dominant thought. When we listen to them, hope is unwinnable. Hope always wins. And for me as a Christian, hope is not a naive idea, because it comes from the cross of Christ. Christ that died for every one of us to give us life. So starting from my window in Marseille, I look at the Mediterranean. And this is the second point of my speech, and that will be shorter. I would like to suggest you all that the Mediterranean has not two shores. Today it has at least 5 shores: North Africa, Near East, the Black Sea, the Azov Sea, that belong to the Mediterranean. And a drop of Dnieper, sooner or later, will reach Gibraltar. So the Slavian shores, and then the Balkans, and then Southern Europe. So it has 5 different shores.
Le professeur Slimani reflète déjà un peu tout cela.
The panel the picture described by Professor Slimani is exactly about this. And each shore has its own challenges. Each shore has its own idea of the Mediterranean Sea. We wanted to think of the Mediterranean started only from Europe, as if the other could not have a different idea of the Mediterranean. But we were wrong. We need to listen to each other. We need to understand the different interpretation of the Mediterranean Sea. We have 5 shores and 4 challenges: economic challenges, economic inequalities that are very, very dangerous because they can create problems and tensions. Then we have migration flows. And a third challenge, cultural and religious plurality. And finally, the ecological and climate and environmental challenge. So we must be fully aware of the whole situation. 2 years ago, I met Pope Francis, and I told him, Your Holiness, you have just ended a synod on Amazonia. It's good, because this is a small region of the world, but it has problems that are linked to the whole world. Let me suggest you to consider also the Mediterranean Sea, because the Mediterranean deserves a synod with all its problems, all its challenges. The whole planet has to be fully aware of the challenges of the Mediterranean. I have to say that the Pope listened to me and he said, oh, that's a great idea. So I think that sooner or later there will be a meeting on the Mediterranean. thanks to the collaboration of the Bishop Conference that held a meeting in Bari and in Florence, we must do everything possible to have a meeting for the Mediterranean, to be at the service not just of the people of the 5 shores of the Mediterranean, but to help the humanity as a whole. I would like to conclude now by saying that we must not be aware to recognize, we must not be afraid to recognize our inner sufferings. We must not be afraid of recognizing our suffering and fighting against the causes of this suffering, because only in this way we will find the courage of hope. We must listen to the cry of the poor, as Pope Francis tells us in the Laudato Si encyclical. But in the Mediterranean, we must not divide these cries, because it is not useful to be surprised by the beauty of nature if we do not suffer in front of a human life that is destroyed. The Mediterranean Sea has a wonderful mission to carry on. Tarek Mitri was telling us about the metaphor of the olive tree, a wonderful olive tree, the light carried by the olive tree. I thought about another metaphor, the metaphor of the almond tree, because the almond tree in the Bible is like the prophet, the guardian, the tree that awakens first in order to see, in order to watch, in order to warn. It is the first tree that has the courage to bloom in spring. And in province, in the southern part of France, sometimes we have ice in spring, and ice affects the almond tree. So I think that the Mediterranean Sea has to see as the almond tree. It must be the guardian, the vigil, and it has to be the light of the olive tree. This is our mission. For the whole world, we are the light of the olive tree and the courage of the almond tree. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monseigneur.
Thank you so much, Monsignor.
Vous nous avez fait rêver de Marseille.
Thank you for having us dream with your description of Marseille. I think we're all invited to Marseille, and thank you for having reminded us of the challenges present in the Mediterranean, and thank you for this great idea for a synod of the Mediterranean, which should be heeded. Thank you for telling us about Marseille and the challenges of the Mediterranean. So now we have 45 minutes for you, for your questions. So let me take advantage of this opportunity to thank all contributors for their precious presentations. So before giving you the floor, I would like to call Luca Anziani to the podium so that he can take the floor. He's president of the Works for Methodist Churches in Italy. So he will introduce our debate with a series of short observations, and then I will leave the floor to you for the first round of questions. And our panelists will answer. We can stay, in this hall up until 12:15.
Cari amici,
dear friends, dear
permettetemi di usare anche il termine di
friends, allow me to use the word brothers and sisters. I'd like to thank you all and the Sant'Egidio community because you helped us all to open our minds and to open our hearts on this shared sea which unites us. I'm very happy to have been a part of the establishment of humanitarian corridors to go together with Sant'Egidio, the Waldensian churches, and the Methodist churches I represent. Of course, this is not a source of pride necessarily, but because, as we say in Italy, if you try to do the best, you don't do what is good. So we have tried to do something, and we managed. Many of you used images to describe what is not imaginable. And I would like to offer you another image, which is a place, the island of Lampedusa. Only by chance it belongs to Italy, but it is no longer a place which belongs to a nation. Lampedusa is a place of the soul, of the spirit. It is a place which weighs on the consciences, of, especially of one of the shores of the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean will not awaken, but the day will come when it will be the mothers of Africa. To reach this shore of the Mediterranean, to ask us, where is my son? In Lampedusa, we have two symbolic places. One is the door of Europe, as we know, which cannot be closed, and which can be seen from both sides. So it is also the door to Africa. It is the door to the south of the Mediterranean. But possibly that is the only door in Europe which is not closed, because all the other European doors are often closed. The other symbolic place is the Lampedusa cemetery, where there are many, many tombs without a name. Men, women, children, recovered from the sea. And many workers in Lampedusa work simply to just find a name for those tombs which are nameless. The future of our continent, Europe, of the whole of the Mediterranean, with its 5 or more shores, the future goes through, is represented by how we make the Mediterranean a place of resurrection rather than a place of death. Our children, our grandchildren, one day will ask us, what did you do? What are we doing today? In 1945, when the gates of the concentration camps of Birkenau and Auschwitz were pulled down, a new Europe was created. Today, if we collect the bodies, many bodies, there are too many to be all recovered. Maybe today we should say that this is the end of a community dream that was started when the Nazi-fascist regime ended. Our continent today is actually saying that Nazism, fascism, anti-Semitism, racism are all opinions. Well, we need to say that these are crimes, not opinions.
But
as often happens, the whole of the Bible holds forecasts rather than prophecies, small forecasts. In the Deuteronomy, Moses says to the people who has escaped from slavery and is in the desert, beware, because up till now the Lord says, I have saved you from the snakes and from the poisonous scorpions. Remember, I did this. So remember me, but beware, because the new Pharaoh, it's a symbol, of course, the new snake, the new scorpion can be born again. And in the epistle to the Jews, we read chapter 12, the author speaks to the communities. Beware, be vigilant, so that no poisonous root may grow and cause evil. So history taught us that evil should be stopped when it is a small root, not when it has borne fruit. And we cannot, as believers of any religion, we cannot place this responsibility on the governments of our countries. We have to take on the responsibility for reconciliation. There is no microscopic village in our continent, Europe, in which there is no church which calls itself Christian, which has preached the gospel as of 1945 onwards, but war is always something that comes from us, which is with us. We have to truly confess our sins each Friday, each Saturday and Sunday. Our faith, be it in a mosque, a synagogue, in a church, will preach, will speak, and will have to teach young people today not to be afraid. Because our young people are afraid of a future which is uncertain. The Mediterranean must be source of hope, because the famous cry of Martin Luther King, "I have a dream," has not stopped being true and active for us. Thank you. Thank you, Luca Anziani. Now we'll wait for your questions, should there be any. Please introduce yourself briefly and tell us if your question is particularly addressed to one of our speakers. So raise your hand so that we can see you and we can get the microphone to you. Hello, I come from Belgium. I would like to ask the question in French. It is a question for Professor Roy. Don't you think politicians should leave religions to handle their own extremisms? The Sant'Egidio meeting tells us that religions can have a dialogue, and possibly better than the states can do along the two shores of the Mediterranean. So I'd like to conclude with an image, which was mentioned by Professor Mitri. So that our sea can become our sea, maybe we should go back to being a jungle. It is the richest and fruitful ecosystem. Many species live there together, you see.
Bonjour. Je vais parler en français. Je suis Arsène.
Hello. My name is Arsène. I'm 36 years old, and I come from the Ivory Coast. I don't have a specific question, just a comment to make. So I'm raising the question for all panelists. I was saying that I come from the Ivory Coast, and people living in Africa amount to 1,400,000,000 people, and a conspicuous amount of these 125 million live in Western Africa. And next to my country, there are 5 other African countries, neighboring countries: Ghana, Mali, Burkina Faso, and to the west, Guinea and Liberia. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a company. We will have presidential elections in 2 years' time, and I also am running for the presidential elections. I work for a Swiss investment fund and have done so over the last 7 years. So I see what is happening in the field of economic development in my country. Around my country, there is an epidemic of coup d'etat. Similarly to what happened with COVID, there was a coup d'etat in Mali, in Chad, and elsewhere. Naturally, all this means more migrants, as was said just now by Monsignor Aveline. The Mediterranean has become a multicultural tomb. I have been working for the Sant'Egidio community of 2004, and we have worked very much to help the poor, especially in the outskirts of Abidjan. President Macron said that resentment justifies wars, and that is true. But in all these countries which are at war, young people are very resentful against France. We may listen or not to that resentment, but it is there amongst the young Africans, especially those in Western Africa. So the Mediterranean has become a multicultural tomb. We're very concerned about this. But this is of no concern amongst African leaders. No conferences were organized in this part of Africa about migration. Today, we can say that Christ is the truth, and I'm a Christian. There's only one truth. Rabbi Rosen said that having a dialogue means speaking with another, not at another. So let us come to the point. After my short introduction, all these countries at war that I spoke about have half of their war budget is funded by Europeans. All Italian taxpayers fund them too. So since I've been working in the field development for the last 7 years, I know that once a state has been given a loan, nobody can check where the money goes. We don't know where the money goes. And this lack of control, or of supervision, in the name of the sovereignty of the state, keeps these people in a state of desperation. These people are forced to cross the Mediterranean. Why is this? I never wanted to come to Europe. If I come to Europe, I do some shopping and I go back home. I can do that because I have a place at home. So if we want to make sure that the Mediterranean is no longer a tomb, I go back to what Professor Rosen said. It is not enough to speak with another. You must speak and listen, because we must listen. People die in the Mediterranean. Young people are resentful, and they are killed by their own governments in their own countries, and they don't know where to turn to. Thank you.
Io sono Nicolò e vengo da Torino.
My name is Nicolò and I come from Turin. I would like to ask a question to Professor Roy. I wanted to ask, hold on a second.
Qual è l'anello di congiunzione che
What's the link between the two shores of the Mediterranean? That's my question.
Grazie Nicolò.
Thank you, Nicolò.
Jumana Tamer, Syria. Grazie Padre Gian perché
I'm from Syria.
لأنه قال إنه الأمل لا يقهر.
And I think that hope cannot be defeated, but I have a question. Here there are three people representing religions, Islam, Christian religion, and Hebraism. My country is the crib of all these religions. My question is there a hope to reach a just, inclusive peace in the Middle East, far from all the political interests? Do you think that this dream is possible?
Grazie.
Thank you.
Buongiorno a tutti, sono Luca della comunità di Sant'Egidio.
Good morning, everyone. I am Luca, the community di Sant'Egidio, more precisely the community of Prima Valle. Yesterday afternoon, we were talking about the gospel and about the gospel generating dreams. And now, correct me if I am wrong, we are talking from a more anthropological point of view. And we are talking about the hope of keeping on dreaming. When we fail to carry on this dream, and when we see around us misery, suffering, and death, friendship among people, and we see many examples of friendship between a man and a woman, a Muslim man or woman, and a Jewish man or woman. This is a wonderful experience. Do you think that this is linked to the Mediterranean? Do you think that all these should change? The brutal impact, the terrible impact of the traffic of weapons and I would say also pathological relationships between the different states. My question is, do you think that diplomacy in the Mediterranean Sea will work?
Grazie. Forse si può fare già un giro.
Thank you. Maybe we can have the first round of answers. You can answer. Mr. Olivier Roy, there were some precise questions for you if you want to start answering.
Merci.
Thank you. States have the responsibility of guaranteeing the safety and security of people, so it's normal to adopt measures to do so. However, we can observe that everywhere these security policies bear with them those initiatives that come from the bottom, the bottom-up initiatives. This search for new ways of socializing which take place in civil society are not heeded. That is the problem. The logic of security only reduces the political space in this sense, and by political I mean looking for new forms of citizenship. I have been asked how can we conceive of a link between the two shores of the Mediterranean. I think we should think of circulation rather than using the term migration, and especially for the populations on the southern shore of the Mediterranean, the shore that starts in Morocco to the Middle East and reaches Turkey. Because we always think of a continuum between north and south, but we forget that often people who wish to come to Europe don't choose it as a final destination, but for them it is a kind of circulation. They think that they can study in Europe and then go back home, or maybe Maybe they will stay in Europe for a time, but then they will invest in the South. There are many entrepreneurs, second-generation entrepreneurs who are born in Europe and who then come back to their countries of origin. There are many retirees from Europe who decide to go and live in Morocco, Tunisia. Many researchers travel around. However, state policies hinder this concept of circular flow because this is not seen as circulation, but as a one-directional movement. However, in the Mediterranean, people move around in every direction. We should have a more flexible policy which would benefit everyone.
جوابي للأخت السورية التي قالت هل هناك أمل؟ نعم.
Hello, the Syrian lady said, is there hope? And there's always hope. There's always hope to reach an equitable and fair solution for the Middle Eastern problem, but for all the issues that the Middle East is facing. From Assisi onwards, all the meetings that I've had, the several meetings that were organized by the Sant'Egidio community, indeed hosted by the community, in these we always tried to work as religious figures and pray. We always prayed to find, with the hope of finding an equitable solution. The rest, of course, is up to politicians, who should listen to heed these appeals and prayers. So we should try and live peace. Desperation is a bad thing in this case. Thank you for your question.
So I will also address our sister from Syria. The first thing to say is we tend to delude ourselves into thinking that there is one Middle East problem. Obviously, that's not the case. There are greater problems and lesser problems. One of the big problems is, of course, the question of Palestine. I'm not minimizing that. But it would be ridiculous to suggest that the tragedy that has befallen Syria over the course of recent years has anything to do with Palestine. It's also not the problem of Syria is not directly related to the problem of Iraq and of Sunni-Shia tensions and the plight of the Yazidis. I mean, each one, the Middle East is full of problems and challenges. And it is no more logical to talk of the Middle East problem than it is to talk of the African problem. There are all kinds of problems, conflicts and tensions in Africa, and each one needs and must be addressed according to its own integrity. So that's my first comment. My second comment is, we all know the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. But why does the pessimist see the glass half empty? Why does the optimist see the glass full? Half full. That depends where you're coming from. The pessimist is actually the unrealistic person. He comes from on top and he expects to see a full glass. And therefore, as he looks down, he gets more and more disappointed at what is missing. The optimist comes from underneath. He knows the glass was originally empty. And therefore, he can celebrate every drop that's in it, even though it's still got a long way to go. We human beings tend to lose perspective very quickly. Instead of being a Hieronymus Bosch or a Leonardo da Vinci, we become Grandma Moses. Everything is flat and there's no perspective. But when you look in terms of history and perspective and see where we were and see where we are, then for all the terrible things in the world, you should be an optimist. Because our world was so, it's difficult for somebody who has lost family and lost relatives, their city has been destroyed, to imagine it. But our world was a more barbaric place. At least today there are places where one can go and at least you can come to Rome and other places where there are certain possibilities. It might not be good enough, but it's something way beyond anything that our great-grandparents and great-grandparents could have ever dreamt of, such kind of possibilities. I finished recently reading a book by an author called Simon Sebag Montefiore. The book is simply called Jerusalem, a Biography. I'm very sad about things that go on to Jerusalem today. We have not learnt in Jerusalem how to be able to celebrate other people's attachments to Jerusalem. Each religious community thinks Jerusalem is somehow exclusively theirs. And Jerusalem is bigger than any one religion and any attachment, just as religion is bigger than any one particular people or any particular group. But when I read this book, I realize that for all the problems in Jerusalem today, it is far, far better than what we used to do to one another. Muslims, Christians, and Jews, what we used to do to one another in the past is absolutely unbelievable, incomprehensible. If you want to have a little bit of optimism, read history and read this book and see where we are. And hopefully that will inspire you to have at least the hope that Professor Muhammad referred to, that hope which is essential. But above all, what our religions teach is that the power of good is greater than the power of evil. If we are good and we pursue goodness, we can overcome evil. Our religions teach us the power of love is greater than the power of hatred. If we pursue love, we can overcome hatred. So we can't find the solutions for the whole world, but what we must know personally is each and every one of us, we must pursue goodness, we must pursue love, and if each of us is resolved in that regard, then nothing is beyond being transformed in a positive manner.
Thank you.
Moi, puisque j'ai été interrogé directement par vous de Syrie.
Since I was addressed a question directly from our Syrian friend, let me clarify something. The expression unconquerable, invincible hope is something that I took from the writings of Padre Jean de Serget. He was belonging to the Tibetan monks order. I'm sure that you know it. What did he mean by this expression? Well, this expression was coined in Rome during a meeting in 1984. He was asked a question, and he lived in a Muslim environment. He was asked, what is the divine sense of what separates us from a human perspective? Well, that is a very profound question. Usually we find meaning, the divine meaning of what unites us from a human perspective. Well, what is the divine meaning which is at the foundation of what humanly separates us? Well, he answered with 3 issues. Number 1, it is a divine sense. Don't ask me, I don't know it, because I'm a man and it's divine. The Quran and the Bible tell us so. There are differences that belong to God. So don't ask me. And above all, don't believe those who tell you, I can explain the divine sense of what just separates us from a human perspective. No. Number 2, he said, I don't know, I cannot know, but I can hope. I can hope that one day will come when in the house of the Father, the home of the Father, I will understand better what these differences mean, how these differences, how loyalty to different religious precepts led us to draw water from the same well. The day will come. 3rd, if I can hope in this, then I must do everything I can to try and embody this hope. And then he added, in Tiberine, the friendship relations with our neighbors, the friendship that we try and establish with the Muslims in the neighborhood and so on, and this is true for everywhere in Jerusalem or elsewhere. Well, all of this means embodying a hope. And he says, the commitment for interreligious dialogue, which is something we do in Sant'Egidio, is something that for us is simply the way in which we can embody this unconquerable, invincible hope, the hope that the day will come in which in the home of the Father we will understand why being faithful to some precepts which are different have meant that we can draw water from the same well. So how does this turn into reality? Number one, resilience, as we said. It is turned into the ability to work together, sharing. We need to work together in education and in every field. And this hope also means believing despite it all, believing in this hope despite it all. And let me conclude by telling you this, but when I tell you this, I don't want to teach anything to anyone, because it is only when you live in a very difficult situation that solution can be found. I cannot and I don't want to teach anyone, give lessons to anyone. The only thing I can do is encourage you all. And to do this, I commit to help you to feed this hope in Syria.
I don't have the expertise to speak about diplomacy or economics or politics, but I don't believe that we can solve the problems only through this. We have to go to the root of the problem. The prophet Isaiah, in the chapter 48 and verses 22, says something very simple, but it's crucial, because the truth is simple. We complicate it, or because we don't understand, or we want to avoid, to distort it. And many times we say, he said good in the gospel, so-and-so, but, and all these buts are a sign that we don't accept this. And maybe one saint was asked, a saint of Catholic Church, that why is so difficult to live the gospel? And he answered, because it's very simple. And the truth is very simple. And this verse of prophet Isaiah is like this: there is no peace where is the evil or the godless. And the word shalom, that have many nuances, and my brother Rosen can explain better maybe, in the when it's translated in the Greek, the Septuaginta, they have it translated with different words. First, shalom was translated more as soteria, salvation. The second was erini, and some cases is the joy. And this verse by Isaiah is translated, there is no joy where is the godless. So where is the godless and the evil? It's in our hearts. If we can purify our hearts, for sure we'll bring peace. Because if we send a person that is conflictual, and if we send with a mission to make peace, you will create more conflicts, because peace has its source from our hearts. And peace, joy, and salvation, it's not related to the temperament of somebody, but it's a gift from God. So I think the best way and the simplest way is to try to purify our hearts. And the pure heart always will bring peace. Thank you.
Une question. Il y a une question.
François Deloz de Belgique. Ma question s'adresse au cardinal Aveline.
I come from Belgium. I'm François Delos. I have a question for
quand se révélera
Archbishop
la
Aveline.
Méditerranée?
In your speech, you asked a question, and you asked, when would the Mediterranean Sea wake up? According to your own experience, what would you suggest to the Mediterranean Sea in order to wake up? And then a small challenge, because we would like to see the light of the olive trees and the courage of the almond trees. The next meeting for peace of the community of Sant'Egidio, why don't you organize this meeting in Marseille?
Y a-t-il d'autres questions?
Are there other questions? Maybe one more question.
Philippe Janssen, communauté Sant'Egidio de Nice.
I'm Philippe Janssen, belonging to the community of Sant'Egidio in Nice. I have a question for Monseigneur Aveline and for Joanne. You reminded that there are 5 shores in the Mediterranean, Monsignor Aveline, not just 2. There are many questions, many debates about the relationship between the southern shore and the northern shore. That is to say, between the Christian world and the Islamic world. And there are also the relationship between the West and the East. So my question is also for the Orthodox people and Joanne. What are the challenges at the basis of this relationship between the East and the West? And what contribution should the Orthodox world and the Balkan area give to solve the problems that we are debating about the relationship between the peoples in the Mediterranean? Good morning. My name is Thomas. My name is Thomas Kay, and I come from a Mediterranean city, which is Brussels. I have a question for Cardinal Aveline.
On ne peut pas être chrétien sans s'ouvrir à une altérité.
You were saying that you cannot be Christian if we do not open up to our neighbors, and if we do not recognize our Hebrew identity, our Jewish identity. And President Macron was referring to the search of purity in the human being. And I have to say that we are a bit concerned when we hear talking about purity in the Christian world in France or in other countries. We know that there is a strong movement in this sense with political connotations. So I would like to ask you, in your dioceses, what are the relationships between the different Christians? How can you urge people, invite people to see not just yourself, but also your neighbors? Is it possible to bring a mic there? There's another question. There is something similar in the Mediterranean to imagine an activity like Erasmus, or is it possible to imagine cultural corridors in the Mediterranean? Exchanges among young people, because we need to involve young people. We see that adults could not make an important step forward. So let's try to prepare, to train the young people through cultural exchanges. Are there any initiatives or are there any elements to work on?
Je suis Lamberto Namou de la communauté de Sant'Egidio.
My name is Lamberto Namou of the community of Sant'Egidio. Now I live in Marseille.
Auprès de Monsieur Aveline.
And I work with Monsignor Avelin. I have a question. The Mediterranean is a place of complementarity, and in this space we can also see that there is a synergy and dynamism between Europe and Africa. And this is for me a kind of marriage, of a union between Europe and Africa. But you can see it also from a different perspective. For me, it's a union that generates young people that now leave Africa to come to live to Europe. In each union, in each marriage, when children are victims of lies, sooner or later they rebel. And in this marriage between Europe and Africa, young people realized that there was a historical lie. History was full of lies. So I believe that we should clean up the history of the relationship between Europe and Africa to restore truth, to repair history. Because in church have been saints, people who tried to fix the situation. I think of Saint Charles de Foucault, who came to Algiers as a soldier. Then he gave up weapons and he came back to Algeria as a witness and as a testimony of the gospel. So I think that it is necessary to recognize that the story has been but written, and we have to rewrite history. We have to listen to the young African people, those coming to Europe and asking to restore history. Thank you so much, and I'll give the floor to our speakers. Who wants to start? Monsignor Avelin? Maybe it is up to you to answer.
Oui. D'abord sur les questions de François.
Let's start from François' questions.
Je sais pas,
When will the Mediterranean Sea wake up? I don't know. I think that right now we have to try to give our own contribution to raise awareness.
Dans cet exemple-là, le processus qui a été engagé
Let's make an example.
à Florence, si
the process that started with Bari and Florence meetings could be enriched by different contributions.
Aussi que les catholiques peut devenir un processus.
Contributions not just made by the Catholics or the bishops. We need to broaden this process in order to give our contributions to this awakening of the Mediterranean. Of course, we cannot decide anything, but we can give our contribution. About your question in Marseille, if it is useful, I am ready to welcome you in Marseille, of course.
Et puis je reviendrai pour les questions de Thomas.
Then there are the questions by Philippe that are for the other speaker, but I go on answering to Thomas. The question on identity, purity, the respect of our neighbors. I totally share your concerns.
L'un des plus grands défis pour
one of the major challenges for the church in France about interreligious relationships and our relationship with the Islamic world. The major challenge is creating and facilitating dialogue among Catholics on the relationship with Muslims. This is the most difficult challenge, and it is even more difficult if we think of political manipulation and on pressures that jeopardize this debate. In France, we do not have a true debate. We have different opinions, but we all have opinions. Debate is something different.
Un très gros problème, mais c'est pas le seul.
This is a huge problem, I think, and this is not the only problem. The problem between me and the rest of the world is a very huge debate, and this does not belong just to the Church of France. It concerns the whole Church, and it appeared just in the 2nd century with the condemnation of Marcione. What did he want to say? He wanted to say that we, as Christians, we just not need to have in our Bibles the Hebrew scripture. We have found our Messiah, and also in the New Testament. It is not necessary to keep all that is contaminated by Judaism. He was condemned in 184, so not yesterday. But the virus of his behavior has poisoned the life of the Church up to now. So let's remind this. Let's remind all this. What happened at the beginning of the 20th century in Germany? There were the works of Adolf von Armagh, the studies carried out by this German Christianism, which was anti-Hebrew. And this is another poison of the Church. So I share your concern. And when I see what happens in France now, and Jean-Dominique Durand could agree with me, I see that the Salisbury Conference, dating back 1947, was an essential milestone between the end of the Second World War and the Second Vatican Council. And I think that in Salisbury, they talked about the need to remind that Jesus was Jewish, and that we cannot talk about Jewish people as a people that is against God. So we should reread all this, all the things that were written in 1947. We, in our Bible, must preserve our Jewish identity, which is part and parcel of our Christian identity. This is why there is a dualism between identity and the respect of the other. And I would like to conclude with the fact that not just the Church of France, but the whole Church should do what Pope Paul VI asked us and was reiterated by Pope John Paul II. We should help all the Catholics to convert to being Catholic. Being Catholic is not a brand. Being Catholic is a vocation, is a dedication which is inside the promise made to Abraham. The day will come when all nations of the earth will converge and will go to Jerusalem. So we must believe this promise, and we as Catholics, we think to have this mission of operating for the sake of this vocation. This is the major challenge. We cannot talk here about that, but we have to be Catholic, and this is what we do in this kind of encounters and meetings.
To the question how different people can live together, we have to believe that we are not so different. We are very close to each other. We share the same nature. In one of his books, well-known St. Gregory theologian, or in the West is known St. Gregory Nazianzus, he writes these words: to say human beings in plural is a heresy. It's one human being and million persons. That means that we share the same nature, the same being, but we are different from each other. But this different, it's superficial. And the philosopher Berdyaev saying something very important. He says different ethnicities and people, all these are superficial. There are only two groups, those who persecute and those who are persecuted, those who crucify and those that are crucified. It is no need to say in which side should be Christians. We have to understand this, that we share the same nature. And this comes if we know really ourselves, not pseudo-self, what we want to be or what the others we want to see to us, but the real self. If we know the real self, we'll see the others are like us. So in the ancient oracle of Delphos was written these words, Gnothi Safton, know yourself. If we know very well ourselves, we know then our brother, and we see this like us. And if we feel that, we cannot hate him, because we cannot hate ourselves. We love him, and we'll make peace, and we'll live together always in peace. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monseigneur. Je crois que c'est l'heure de conclure. Nous avons parlé de nombreuses villes de Méditerranée, Alger, Marseille, Jérusalem, Bari. Et je voudrais conclure avec deux autres villes de Méditerranée, Assise, qui a donné son nom à l'esprit, qui nous réunit ici depuis désormais 36 ans, l'esprit d'Assise, qui est une grande force à propager partout dans nos villes respectives dès demain.
Of Assisi. Let us recall the spirit of Assisi as a conclusion. This is something we should spread to all cities. And the second city I'd like to mention is Rome. Rome, where we're now with the Colosseum, a place of much suffering, but which tonight, with the presence of the Holy Father, will be a place of hope, will be the place whence we hear the cry for peace. So see you all soon at the Colosseum, and we will always meet on the road to Assisi. Thank you.